My name is Reese, I'm 34, and 6 weeks ago I sat across from my wife Ella at a restaurant I couldn't afford, listening to her tell me this was the best birthday she'd ever had, and I smiled knowing exactly what she'd said about me 11 minutes earlier, on the phone outside the bathroom. Ella and I got married when I was 28. We met through her sister Christina, who I'd been friends with since college. Christina always told me Ella ran through people when they stopped being useful, but I didn't listen. The first 2 years were fine. We rented a two-bedroom, both worked, split bills, then I got laid off and spent 5 months job hunting, and the real Ella showed up. She'd make comments at dinners about how Reginald, her father, would never have let his family go 5 months without income. Reginald is a retired contractor who thinks any man under 6 figures is just lazy. Ella grew up hearing that, married me thinking I'd become that. When I didn't, she stopped pretending. By the time that birthday dinner happened, our marriage had been dead for a year. I'd started a delivery route job that paid fine, but wasn't what Ella imagined. She wanted renovated houses and new cars every 3 years. I gave her stability and she treated it like an insult. But I stayed because my mother Pamela had been diagnosed with early-stage kidney disease 2 years prior, and Ella had made herself essential to Pamela's care. She drove her to appointments, picked up prescriptions, handled insurance calls. My mother adored Ella, told me weekly I'd married above my station, and Ella used every minute of that goodwill as an investment. The birthday dinner, March 14th, a Thursday. I pulled $400 from our savings, which was about $600 total. Picked a place Ella had been tagging on Instagram for months, bought her a necklace from a local jeweler for another $80. I did all this because some stupid part of me still believed trying hard enough would bring back the woman I married. That's what I'm most angry about now. Not what she said on the phone. The fact that I was still trying. About 40 minutes into dinner, her phone rang and she said she needed to take it. Probably Christina. She walked toward the bathrooms. I waited 5 minutes, then got up to ask about the dessert menu. She was standing near the emergency exit with her back to me, and I heard everything. She was telling someone, who I now know was Frank, that I was pathetic, that I'd blown our last money on this stupid dinner thinking it would fix things, that once my mother passed and we got the house, she'd finally leave and they could stop hiding. I stood there maybe 10 seconds, walked back to the table, sat down, picked up the menu. When she came back, I asked about dessert like nothing happened. She ordered the chocolate torte. I watched her eat it. She told me she loved me in the car. I said it back. Everything made sense after that. The way she'd inserted herself into my mother's medical life. The way she'd fight me on selling the house if Pamela ever needed assisted care. Always insisting we could handle it at home. She wasn't being a devoted daughter-in-law. She was protecting her future asset. And Frank, whoever he was that night, was waiting in the wings. Next morning, I started making moves. Didn't tell Ella anything. Went to work, came home, ate dinner, watched TV. But during my routes, I made phone calls. First to my mother's estate attorney to understand how the house was titled. Pamela had put it in a living trust 4 years ago with me as sole beneficiary, and Ella had no idea because she assumed Pamela held it outright. Second call was to Christina. I didn't say what I'd heard, just asked casually if Ella had mentioned anyone named Frank lately. Maybe a coworker. Christina went quiet for a second, then said she didn't want to get involved. That told me everything. I spent the next 5 days acting normal. Ella had no clue. Still texting Frank, still visiting my mother, still planning her exit while eating meals I cooked and sleeping in the bed I paid for. Day 6. I made my first real move and everything changed. I came home that Wednesday and Ella wasn't there. Clothes still in the closet, her car in the lot, but she was gone. I checked my phone. 13 missed calls from her back to back, starting around 2 p.m. I'll explain those calls in the update. But by day 6, I already had a plan. I wasn't panicking. I was ready. And Ella had just walked into the first part of it without knowing. This man sat across the table from someone who was actively mocking the meal he emptied his savings account for and asked her about dessert. That is a level of emotional discipline that borders on terrifying. Most people would have caused a scene that gets them banned from that restaurant and 3 restaurants on the same block. Reese watched her eat chocolate torte. He drove her home. He said, "I love you too." And then he went to work the next morning and started making phone calls on his delivery route, like he was assembling a heist crew between dropping off packages. This man was plotting her financial and emotional destruction while parallel parking a van full of Amazon boxes. And honestly, the part that hits the hardest isn't even the betrayal. It's the $400. Because $400 out of $600 in savings isn't a dinner. That's a man putting 2/3 of his entire safety net on the table because he genuinely believed love was a math problem and he just hadn't shown enough work yet. That's the kind of thing that makes you physically angry on someone else's behalf. He was solving for X, and X was already at Frank's apartment. But Pamela having the house in a trust with Reese as sole beneficiary? Ella spent 2 years playing nurse to a woman whose house she was never gonna get. She was watering a plant in someone else's garden thinking she owned the yard. That's not even karma. That's just bad due diligence on a con. You're gonna run a long game on a woman's inheritance and you never once checked the paperwork? Ella was playing chess, but she forgot to look at the board. Update 1. Alright, a lot of you wanted to know about the 13 missed calls, so here it is. And yeah, it gets worse. Remember I said on day 6 that Wednesday, I made my first move. Here's what I did. That morning before work, I drove to my mother Pamela's house. I sat with her at her kitchen table, and I told her everything. What Ella said on the phone, the mention of the house, Frank, all of it. I didn't sugarcoat it, and I didn't dramatize it. I just told her what I heard word for word. My mother sat there for a long time and then asked me if I was sure. I told her I was standing 6 feet away and Ella didn't know I was there. Pamela asked me to repeat the part about the house. So I did. She didn't cry. She got very still and then told me she wanted to call her attorney that afternoon. I said I'd already spoken to him and confirmed the trust was solid. Ella had no claim. Pamela looked at me and said she wanted to do more than that. This is where it gets important. My mother decided on her own. And I want to be clear about that because people will say I manipulated a sick woman. She decided to cut Ella off from her care routine entirely. Pamela called her insurance coordinator that same morning and removed Ella as an authorized contact on all her medical accounts. She changed her pharmacy pickup authorization. She called her neighbor, who she'd known for 30 years, and asked if she could handle the Tuesday and Thursday appointment drives instead. By noon, Ella's entire role in my mother's life was gone, and Ella didn't know yet. The 13 calls started around 2 p.m. Ella had gone to pick up Pamela's prescription like she did every Wednesday, and the pharmacy told her she was no longer authorized. She tried calling the insurance line, and they told her the same thing. She called Pamela directly, and my mother didn't answer. So Ella called me over and over. I was on my route, and I saw the notifications stacking up, but I let them go. Every single one. I got home around 6. Ella was sitting on the couch, and she immediately started in on me, saying something was wrong with Pamela, that the pharmacy had cut her off, that maybe Pamela was confused or someone had stolen her identity. She was spinning this whole story about how worried she was. And I just stood there looking at her because we both knew she wasn't worried about my mother. She was worried about losing her access, her foothold, the thing that kept her connected to that house. I told Ella that my mother had made some changes to her medical contacts and that it was Pamela's decision. Ella asked why. I said I didn't know the details. Ella pushed harder, asking if Pamela was upset with her, if something had happened, if Christina had said something. She was cycling through every possibility, except the real one, because she couldn't imagine I knew. That's the thing about Ella. She'd spent so long seeing me as the guy who tries too hard and notices too little, that it never crossed her mind I might have heard her that night. I let her spiral for about an hour. She called Christina, who told her she had no idea what was going on. She tried Pamela again. No answer. She texted Pamela a long message about how concerned she was and how she hoped everything was okay. My mother showed me that text the next day, and we both read it knowing exactly what it really meant. Now here's the part where things escalated beyond what I expected. Thursday morning, Ella drove to Pamela's house without telling me. She showed up at the door, and my mother actually let her in. They sat in the living room, and Pamela did something I hadn't planned for. She didn't confront Ella about Frank or the phone call. Instead, she told Ella that she'd been thinking about her care situation and decided she was becoming too much of a burden on the family and wanted to simplify things. She thanked Ella for everything and said the neighbor would handle it from now on. Pamela told me later she wanted to see what Ella would do with a graceful exit, whether she'd take it or fight for access, because that would prove everything. Ella fought. She spent 40 minutes at my mother's kitchen table arguing that the neighbor couldn't handle the medication schedules, that the insurance stuff was complicated, that she'd built relationships with Pamela's doctors. She was practically begging to stay involved in a sick woman's medical care. And if you can't see how messed up that is, I don't know what to tell you. She wasn't doing this out of love. She was doing it because without that role, she had no reason to be connected to the house or its future. Pamela held firm. Ella left. And that night she came home, and for the first time in our marriage, she was actually angry at me. Not the passive comments, not the comparisons to Reginald. Real anger. She told me I'd turned my mother against her. I told her I hadn't done anything and that Pamela was a grown woman making her own choices. Ella said I was lying, that Pamela would never do this on her own, that someone had poisoned her against Ella. She kept pushing, and I just kept repeating that it was Pamela's decision, and I had nothing to do with it. What Ella didn't know was that this was only the first layer. Because while she was busy panicking about Pamela, I'd spent that Thursday making calls about our lease. Our apartment lease was in my name only. Ella had never bothered to get added because when we signed it, she said paperwork gave her a headache and I could just handle it. I'd been looking at the renewal terms and found out I had options. I wasn't ready to use them yet, but I was getting everything lined up. And then Friday morning, something happened that I genuinely didn't see coming. Reginald called me. Not Ella. Me. He wanted to meet for lunch and talk about what was going on with Pamela. Ella had called her father crying, and Reginald, the man who'd spent 6 years telling me I wasn't good enough, now wanted to have a sit-down because his daughter was upset. I said yes, because I wanted to see exactly how far this family would go to protect Ella's plan. That lunch is where everything started to unravel in ways none of them expected. Pamela is an absolute general, because she didn't just cut Ella off, she set a trap disguised as a kindness. You've done so much. Let me take this burden off you. That's the most elegant test of character I've ever heard. A normal person, someone who actually cared, would have been a little hurt but said, "Okay, I understand, I'm here if you need me." That's it. That's the whole response if you genuinely love someone. But Ella spent 40 minutes arguing her way back into a sick woman's prescription pickups like she was negotiating a lease on a rental property. Because she was. That's literally what this was to her. Pamela's medical care was Ella's proximity alarm to the house. And the second it got disconnected, she went into full panic mode. And look, Pamela asking to see whether Ella would take the graceful exit? That's a woman who wanted to be wrong. She was giving Ella every chance to prove that this was actually about love and not real estate. She practically gift-wrapped the off-ramp, and Ella drove right past it at 90 miles an hour because she couldn't afford to lose her position. That 40 minutes of begging told Pamela more than Reese's entire story did. Also, Ella not putting her name on the lease because paperwork gives her a headache is genuinely poetic. She was so comfortable being carried that she didn't even bother to make sure the floor underneath her had her name on it. She outsourced every piece of administrative power to a man she was actively planning to leave, and now every single one of those decisions is a door she can't open. That's not karma. That's just the natural consequence of treating your husband like unpaid staff. Eventually, the staff quits and takes the keys with him. Update 2. So a lot of you called the Reginald lunch being a setup. You were right, but not in the way you think. Buckle up because this is where I stopped playing defense. Saturday afternoon, I met Reginald at a barbecue place near his side of town. He picked the spot because it's where he takes people when he wants to feel like the big man. The guy who knows the owner, gets the corner booth, orders for the table. He was already seated when I got there and had ordered me a drink without asking. That's Reginald. He decides what you need before you sit down. He started out calm. Told me he understood marriages go through rough patches, that he and Ella's mother had their share before she passed. Then he got to the point. He said Pamela cutting Ella out of her care was an overreaction, and that whatever family disagreement was happening, it shouldn't affect a sick woman's support system. He told me I needed to talk to my mother and fix it. Not asked, told. Like I was one of his subcontractors who'd messed up a pour. I let him talk for about 15 minutes. He covered how much Ella had sacrificed for Pamela, how she'd given up weekends and personal time, how nobody else in the family had stepped up like she had. And here's what was interesting. He never once asked me why Pamela had made the change. He didn't care about the reason. He only cared that Ella was upset and that someone needed to make it right. That's the Reginald playbook. His daughter's feelings are facts and everyone else's reasons are excuses. When he finished, I asked him one question. I asked if he knew who Frank was. Reginald's face changed. Not guilt, not surprise, irritation. He told me Frank was a friend of the family who'd known Ella since high school and that I was being paranoid. I asked him if a friend of the family usually talks to someone's wife at 8 p.m. about waiting until a mother-in-law dies to get her house. Reginald told me I was twisting things and that Ella would never say something like that. I told him I was standing right there when she said it. He didn't respond to that. He picked up his drink, took a long sip, and then told me that even if Ella had said something out of frustration, marriage means working through things and I owed it to the family to find a resolution. That's when I understood something about Reginald that I should have figured out years ago. He knew, maybe not every detail, maybe not Frank specifically, but he knew Ella's plan was to ride out the marriage until the house came through. And he was fine with it because in Reginald's world, a man who can't provide what his daughter deserves has it coming. I wasn't a son-in-law to him. I was a stepping stone that had the nerve to complain about being stepped on. I didn't argue with him. I finished my food, thanked him for lunch, and left. On the drive home, I called Christina. This time I wasn't casual. I told her flat out that I knew about Frank, that Reginald had basically confirmed it, and that I needed her to tell me who this guy actually was. Christina fought me on it for a solid 10 minutes, telling me she loved her sister, but she loved me too, and she didn't want to be in the middle. I told her she was already in the middle, and she had been since the day she introduced us. That landed. Christina told me Frank was a guy Ella had dated before me. They'd been together for 3 years in their early 20s, and he'd broken it off because he wasn't ready to settle down. He came back into the picture about a year ago when he reached out to Ella through Instagram. Christina said Ella had told her it was just catching up. Old friends, nothing serious. Christina didn't believe her, but she didn't push it because she didn't want the fight. So now I had the full picture. Ella married me because Frank wasn't available. When Frank came back, I became the placeholder she was waiting to discard, but not before she secured the one asset that made the marriage worth tolerating, my mother's house. And Reginald supported all of it because he'd never respected me in the first place. Monday morning, I went to our apartment management office. The lease renewal was coming up in 6 weeks, and I told them I would not be renewing. Under our lease terms, that meant a 30-day notice once the current term expired. And since only my name was on it, Ella had no standing to contest it. I wasn't kicking her out that day, but I was starting the clock and she didn't know it. That same Monday, I sat down with Pamela and told her everything Christina had shared about Frank. My mother's reaction was something else. She wasn't just angry for me, she was angry for herself. She'd spent 2 years trusting Ella with her medical information, her prescriptions, her doctors. She'd let this woman into the most vulnerable parts of her life, and the whole time Ella was counting down until she died. Pamela told me she wanted to see Ella face to face before this was over. Not to forgive, not to understand. She wanted Ella to know that she knew. I told her not yet, because I still had one more thing to set up. Ella and Frank thought they were waiting me out. Reginald thought he could pressure me into compliance. Christina was trying to stay neutral, but she'd already given me everything I needed. Each one of them had a role in this, and none of them realized I was about to pull every thread at once. That Wednesday, Ella found out about the lease. And that is when the real chaos started. Reginald's whole move at that barbecue place tells you everything about how Ella got this way. He ordered Reese's drink before Reese sat down. Think about that as a personality trait passed down through a family. Deciding what someone else needs. Deciding what someone else deserves. Deciding what someone else should tolerate. That's not hospitality. That's control wearing a bib and eating ribs. Ella didn't learn to see people as utilities from nowhere. She was raised by a man who treats every relationship like a contractor-client dynamic, where he's always the client. And the, even if she said it, marriage means working through things line? That is the most revealing sentence anyone in this story has said. Because Reginald didn't say she wouldn't do that. He skipped right past denial and went to, even if she did, so what? That's a man telling you to your face that his daughter's scheme is less important than your obligation to endure it. In Reginald's moral framework, Ella plotting to inherit a dying woman's house through a fake marriage is just ambitious. And Reese objecting to it is the actual problem. The audacity isn't Ella's plan, it's Reese having feelings about it. Also Frank being an ex who bounced because he wasn't ready to settle down and then slid back into Ella's DMs a decade later. That man didn't come back because he loved Ella. He came back because she was convenient and low maintenance. She was already married, already housed, already someone else's financial responsibility. Frank wanted a relationship with none of the infrastructure costs. And Ella was so desperate to feel chosen by the guy who rejected her at 22 that she was willing to burn down an entire marriage and exploit a sick woman just to be his backup option. Not even his first choice now, his second-round pick. She destroyed everything for a man who wouldn't even offer her his couch when it all fell apart. Final update. This is the last one. And yeah, it all came down exactly how I wanted. Ella found out about the lease that Wednesday because the management office sent a non-renewal confirmation to the apartment addressed to me. She opened it. I got home, and she was in the kitchen holding the letter, furious. She started asking what this was, why I was ending the lease, where she was supposed to go. I told her I was moving out, and since the lease was in my name only, I didn't need her agreement. She said I couldn't just throw her out. I said I wasn't throwing anyone out. The lease was ending, and she could make her own arrangements. Then she switched tactics. Went from angry to desperate, started talking about how we could fix things, how she knew she'd been difficult, how Pamela's illness had stressed her out. She brought up the birthday dinner, said it was the best night she'd had in months, and didn't that prove we had something? And I stood there because she was using the dinner I spent our last savings on, the one where she called me pathetic on the phone, as proof I should keep investing in her. I told her we were done, and I'd be filing for divorce. She demanded a reason, so I said it. I told her I heard her on the phone at the restaurant. Every word. The pathetic comment, the money, My mother's house. Frank? Her face went blank. She didn't deny it or apologize. She asked how long I'd known. I said since that night. She asked why I didn't say anything then. I told her because I wanted to make sure that when this ended, she'd walk away with nothing to show for 6 years of pretending. Ella left that night and drove to Reginald's. And that's when Reginald tried one more play. Friday morning, Reginald showed up at Pamela's house. He came through the side door Pamela left unlocked for the neighbor, handling her appointments. He sat in my mother's living room and started telling her this was a misunderstanding, that I was dragging her into my marriage problems, that Ella loved her like a mother and cutting her off was cruel. Classic Reginald, reframing everything so his daughter's the victim. But I was already there. I'd been at Pamela's since Thursday because I knew once Ella went to Reginald's, he'd come for my mother next. That's how they operate. When one angle fails, they go for the softest target. So when he walked in and saw me next to Pamela, the script fell apart. Pamela handled it herself. She told Reginald she knew everything, that his daughter had been waiting for her to die for the house, that the house was in a trust and Ella would never see a cent. Then she said the thing that hit hardest. She told him Ella had used her medical care as a leash, that every prescription pickup and doctor's appointment was just Ella staying close enough to monitor when the house might free up. She told him she'd trusted Ella with her health, and Ella treated it like a business arrangement. Reginald argued, said Ella was young and made a mistake, that Pamela was being manipulated by me. Pamela told him to get out. He kept going, said the family needed to sit down together. Pamela stood up and told him if he came back uninvited, she'd call the police. Reginald left. That afternoon, I called Christina. She was done being neutral. She told me Ella had been texting her all morning needing money for a deposit because Reginald's place was too small long-term. Frank wasn't offering his place, which told me everything about what Ella meant to him. She was the side plan, not the main one. Christina said she wasn't giving Ella money and was done covering for her. Divorce filing went through 2 weeks later. Ella contested nothing because there was nothing to contest. The lease ended and I moved to Pamela's temporarily. Ella bounced between Reginald's spare room and Christina's couch for 3 weeks before finding a studio on her own salary. Frank stopped responding to Ella's messages about a week after she left our apartment. Turns out waiting for someone's mother to die for a house is less appealing when the house is already off the table. Reginald hasn't spoken to me since Pamela's living room. Pamela changed her locks and keeps the side door bolted now. She's doing fine. Her kidney numbers actually improved at her last checkup, which I mentioned because Ella spent 2 years acting like my mother was on her deathbed when she's managing the condition and living her life. So that's the whole story. I spent our last $400 on a birthday dinner thinking I could save my marriage. Heard my wife call me pathetic on the phone, and instead of flipping the table, I ordered dessert. 6 weeks later, she's in a studio. Frank ghosted her. Reginald got thrown out of my mother's house, and I'm at Pamela's kitchen table writing this. She ordered the chocolate torte that night. I hope it was worth it. Frank ghosting Ella within a week of the house being off the table is the most brutally honest thing any person in this story has done without saying a single word. He didn't need a conversation, didn't need a breakup, didn't even need an excuse. The asset disappeared and so did he. Like a pop-up ad that closes itself when it realizes you're using ad blocker. Frank was never in love with Ella. He was in love with the version of Ella that came with equity. The second she became a woman in a studio apartment splitting rent with herself, his Instagram went real quiet. And the wildest part is Ella probably didn't even see it coming, because she was so busy running a con on Reese that she never considered someone might be running the same playbook on her. She thought she was the chess player. Turns out she was just another piece on somebody else's board. And Ella bringing up the birthday dinner as evidence they had something worth saving? Using the exact night she stood by an emergency exit and called him pathetic to Frank? That's not manipulation anymore. That's a person who's been performing for so long she's forgotten which version of events is real. She genuinely tried to weaponize Reese's love against him using the same night she mocked it. That takes a level of compartmentalization that should be studied somewhere. But honestly, Pamela is the MVP of this entire saga. This woman has kidney disease, just found out her daughter-in-law was running a countdown clock on her life, and she still had the composure to set a character test, hold firm through emotional pressure, and then look Reginald in the face and dismantle his entire narrative without raising her voice. Pamela didn't flip a table. She didn't cry. She told a grown man to leave her house and threatened to call the police. That's not a sick woman being manipulated by her son. That's a woman who spent 2 years being lied to and decided the lie stops in her living room.